So are we going to attack Apple here, or what kind of discussion are we going to have?
It's not anything like that. Yep.
We both
I wanted to just make sure that it kind of. Oh, that was not showing either. That's okay. And perhaps you guys know more about Apple, because I watched the WWDC, but then I don't have a lot of extensive notes on it. So if there's things from WWDC that we want to talk about, but it's not. We say device agnostic, to where it's just like
we talk about everything.
Yeah, we talk about everything.
Yeah,
it's passion of mobile.
Because he's a fan of Google, and we both are iOS engineers, so.
And Drake, and so he's an iOS user, so
oh, nice.
I'm outnumbered. So
many a Thursday, I was the only iOS guy there.
Yeah. But really, it's just for the love of mobile, whatever it might be, and
yeah.
As we've talked about a lot of times, it really is. It just comes down to which ecosystem you end up using. Which, none of it is intended to be slammage, but there are things that I have opinions about the way that either one of them are moving forward, and we can talk more about that as well. But I guess we can. I'm going to pull up my notes from.
You want to invite me?
Sure. Okay, now I'll make sure.
Well, it went away. There it is.
So
that's it. Google.
So we can start now that I've reestablished my connection here. We'll talk about some of the things that came out from Google I/O. I guess one of the first things, since I just actually put it onto this Nexus 5, should I say, my friend Bill Stebbins helped me put Android M onto this Nexus 5, so I'm going to change my cameras here to this one. We can put this up here so that you guys in the room can see it. And actually, I probably should have my notes here on the other screen. There, yeah, that's better. So this is the Nexus 5 with Android M, and really, And it's going to be backwards to you guys on the screen here because it's probably right side foremost for you to watch on the Hangout, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the doesn't focus very well. Turn my screen brightness down too. If I turn it back off and turn it on, they changed it from there used to be this was to have the dialer, and they changed it to the microphone so that you could just swipe in right away. And it's saying can't reach Google, so I'm not connected online with this phone here. But it's just a quick way to be able to launch without even having to say anything. So that it's pretty handy that it's just down in the corner, so just flick your thumb and then it would be listening. So granted, I know that once you do a Touch ID, then you pretty much are just touching the D-pad and you do the same thing with iOS, right? So I guess it's just it makes a lot more sense because I never initiated a phone call from the lock screen like that. On the Nexus 9, but it's not here in the Nexus 5 because it doesn't really have the processor to be able to handle it. Like my Moto X, like right there where it's just showing that ambient time display, and then if I wave my hand over, that it wakes up the screen. And if I had a notification, I'd press and I'd see the notifications. It's very low power consumption kind of thing. Well, Moto made, so there's two processors, one that's handling that kind of stuff, and then your main processor. Well, the Nexus 5 doesn't have that. Including, there's going to be a feature where you can just double tap to wake the phone. And that's on some, like the OnePlus One phone has it, and I think a couple other phones. And so they noticed it in the Android M build on the Nexus 9 because it's a newer device. And so they right in the menu you see as far as options for power or display, someplace that says double tap to wake. And I did have a OnePlus One last year, and for a short while, and I did like that because you just reach and just touch twice with your finger and unlock the device. And nonetheless, that's one of the features there as far as in M. And I'm just going to skim over some of the other particular things. Is that so? I'll unlock. Is that they changed some things up here in the notification to where when you go to do volume. You're now able to select not just the overall volume, but the music volume and the volume of your alarms when you, so by default, you can see it's just like your alarm volume, but once you, your system volume, but then once you tap that arrow, then if it was like, no, I really just want to adjust the music and keep everything else the same, then they added that. And then that's a good idea. They also added, where was it? It was like a do not disturb. You could quickly just tap do not disturb. I think there's a do not disturb in iOS.
It's not that easy.
Isn't it? You swipe up from the bottom to get to do not disturb. It's just nice to know that they've added that because if you really quickly, just with one tap, you're just like, you know what?
It's here, so it's like the night.
Yes. So yeah, the equivalent kind of thing. So
do not disturb.
Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. The moon, the dark moon.
Yeah, I don't usually use it, but it's there.
Yeah. And then I think that's about all as far as like what's in the notification curtain you're able to pull down there. Otherwise, one of the things they changed was the app drawer. And
so when we say they changed, we're talking about what changed?
That they added like the
new update of the.
Well, this is Android M, so this is a preview for what's coming out in the fall. Yep. And so then with the app drawer, which is a unique thing to Android and not iOS, is that typically a lot of app drawers you end up swiping left to go page to page alphabetically through the apps, and they changed it. And again, this is preview, so a lot of stuff could change by the time they go to release it. But your most recent used apps are at the top, so you can see Play Store, Drive, Downloads, and YouTube are the ones that I have had open on this since M was installed on it this morning. And then otherwise, is alphabetically, you can see like the letters as well, which is kind of a little goofy. People have said that they kind of aesthetically looks very goofy, but at least they're all there, so that like if you knew, like on my phone, if I wanted to get to, I have an app that's like called like Weather Watch or something like that. If I tap on my app drawer, and yes, it's taking forever for my screen to paint because I've got memory issues with my device. But I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swipes just for me to get on over to weather time for me to actually get and launch that. Whereas if I had as many apps on this, you'd flick. Now you can see it's pretty short because there's not a lot of apps there. But if you wanted to get all the way to the bottom, you just flick, and it's going to infinite scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you're going to get to the apps that are like X, Y, Z at the bottom of the list. So it's a little faster. So then they're still tweaking this.
Scroll horizontally?
No. So as a matter of fact, some people who've had this on their device for a bit, they'll get confused because, over here on this one, then it is scrolling horizontally, and then on this one is the vertical scroll. So they're just moving to the vertical scroll. Now there are some, what do you call them? They're just, lack of term, it's like the interface that you can put on top of Android. You can choose to have, there's like a Google, the launcher. There's a Google Now launcher, which is really like what's default on my device. So that with a Google Now launcher, if you swipe off to the left from the main screen, it's all your Google Now cards. And then, so I go back, this is my main screen, and then I could have as many other panels that I'd like to have. If you're on a Samsung device, you're not going to have this view over here by default because Samsung has their own interface on there called TouchWiz, and then HTC has their HTC Sense. So that they've put their own interface over top of Android of how it's going to look. And some of them have an app drawer that goes up and down, and some of them have an app drawer that goes left and right. But that's just their own custom way of doing it. At least the default Google way used to be left and right, and now they're switching it up and down. And then also doing that grouping with the letters, which, again, I don't know if that's... So you can see, there's only four apps that are in the F and G category, so you got all these blanks that looks kind of goofy. But I guess if you end up getting used to it, that your eyeball is looking, and you're like, well, I know I'm looking for...
Are the letters hot?
No. But I do notice that they kind of notice that, watch the C. You get back over here to the screen. And it kind of hangs until you get past all the C's.
Ah.
That's a material design kind of thing. That material to where sometimes you can end up having items that might be...
similar to the headers in iOS, but that didn't exist before now.
Correct. Yeah, this, and there might be elements of this that might exist in Android now if they're using material.
Right.
Because then that's that kind of thing where you end up maybe have a header at a section, and that header stays at the section until you move on. I've noticed it even on my devices, some very cool nuances to calendar. That if I open up the calendar, and let me go back to what view? If it would be schedule view. Yeah, so you can see the 23. Again, my screen's too bright. Sorry. I have to turn it down for the camera to not freak out. But where it has the 23 and the 23 stays there until I'm past the last appointment for the 23, and then it disappears. So it just gives that nice feeling of you know where you're at, because then that header moves along with it. So anyway, so then that's just the app drawer thing. I'll cover some of these other things that are. One of the key things that's going to change on Android M is about permissions, and that is going to be very much borrowed from iOS. There were certainly a lot of things between Google I/O and WWDC. Each of them presented things that the other has. Mm-hmm. And anymore, people didn't really make that big of a deal about it, because it used to be a couple years back when all of a sudden iOS didn't have copy and paste, and then they add it. And then the Android haters, that are Apple haters, would end up saying, "Oh, we've had copy and paste on Android since the beginning. It's about time," and then other different functionality. That suddenly a notification curtain came to iOS, But what ultimately has happened is feature parity between the OSs. Is that they're really getting to where, and then it just comes down to the ecosystem that you're in, because these are getting so similar in a lot of regards. And so with that, one of the things that has been an issue, and even we've dealt with developing the apps at Humana, is permissions kind of thing. That I was showing one of the developers the other day, that when I was first installing the Vitality app, that it came up and it just said something like, has access to your SD card and can read all the contents. That sounds scary to a user who doesn't know what you're actually talking about. And it's like, well, it's just, there's some of those generic permissions, but that'd be like before you even install it. So instead, using the iOS type of thing, as I understand it, and I've not dove into this yet, but if I go to the settings, I think it's under apps, and say if I like just happen to go to Chrome, permissions, then there's all the permissions for Chrome. And for those, they're default toggled on. But when in the future, when you go to install, say like the Vitality app, and then you suddenly for the first time want to submit a photo proof of an event you did, then it's going to come up and say, do you want to allow for this app to use the camera? Did I say phone? I meant camera. So then like iOS. So it's a good thing. It's just like, it wasn't like no one comes out and says that, and the Apple people didn't come out and say, oh, we're adding such and such feature that's just like Android, but the people are looking at it going, yeah, that exists over there, but yeah, it's a good ad. I'm glad that you added it. So this is supposed to be huge as far as that, as well as this part just here in the app info is supposed to be a lot more.
Right now, sorry, if you had an app that needed to access the camera and you click no the first time, like you don't allow the app to use the camera, you were not able to go back to settings and enable it?
No, those permissions were on by default when you first installed the app. Then it would just tell you, hey, by the way, this is going to use the phone, it's going to use the camera, it's going to possibly make you incur charges because you could be using data, and all of those things would just be laid out right out front when you're first installing the app. Right, okay. There's like this laundry list, and then those permissions were like so broad that, like in the case with the My Humana app, is that the camera is used primarily to be able to take a picture of a receipt so you could submit it for reimbursement. And yet when you look at what the broad term for the camera permissions made it seem as if be able to view your entire camera roll, and this app can do this and that. It's like, well, because you couldn't limit it down and go,
pictures of you.
It's simply to take a picture of a receipt, but you couldn't spell it out so simply. So instead, like what iOS has done for the longest time, it makes more sense, is a person now is in the app, goes to that feature, and for the first time, so they're not going to get prompted moving forward, they won't get prompted in Android M about all those permissions right from install. Instead, they'll just install the app, and then when you go to use something that requires some of those special permissions, you'll end up getting asked. And Android users will be like, wow, I've never seen this before. I've seen my friend doing
that for ages now.
Right, and so something else is just here on the app info, which is something that's very convenient, like on Android, is that I could take an app, say did I install anything? Yeah, okay, I'll say like the Vitality app. If I press and hold on it, oh shoot, it doesn't have it there. Never mind. That was something weird. I am playing with very much the developer preview of this, so something could be goofy. I'm used to when I'm in the app drawer like this, to press and hold, you have an option of uninstalling the app or seeing the app info. And instead, I didn't see that. So let me go back over to the settings here. And if I go to apps, and if I go down to, all right, so Humana Vitality, then it shows that it's 41 megabyte file. It shows the data that it's used. So it's just a lot of good info that just shows right in the app info that you're able to see when you're in the settings. You could end up just going into notifications and choosing to change any of them on the fly. It'll also show you the amount of battery that it's been using since the last charge, so that if you did suspect that an app, so this is all enhancements to Android M, to where a user would end up having a little bit more info on the app, if they're just wondering, how much is this using, how much data is it using, how much battery is it using. You'd simply just go into the settings and go to that list of apps and tap on it and be able to see it. So it's nice that they've just kind of put all that together. So between the permissions and then just being a little bit more, this is all, you could have gotten all this stuff, but you had to go to separate places. You would have had to go from the out here, go to battery, and then you'd see the apps that are using the most battery. And then you could go to data and see which apps are using the most data, but you're fishing around, so instead they kind of brought it all into one place, so it makes more sense that way. And then something that, oh, is that him calling from the door? What is the next thing? Oh, it's going to be adding fingerprint support. So it's only going to be on the device that will have a fingerprint reader. Little side note, sometimes we do bounce back and forth, we don't stay on one OS, is that there's been some renderings of a future version of the iPhone that will not have the button at the bottom, the hardware button. And instead, the screen really hardly any bezel, and it comes down to the bottom, and the fingerprint reader will actually be on the screen. And I could see that coming with Android devices as well. And that Google would like to have that be in the OS. Maybe we'd see that hint of that next year.
That will help also to these watches to have.
Yes, so that all the screens would just have that capability, that a layer underneath the screen is the fingerprint reader. Hello, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Hi.
Okay, sorry.
So, but at least they're adding fingerprint reader support, and then whatever it's going to be up to the hardware manufacturers for them to put in. Most of them are going to end up being like Samsung has, where the fingerprint readers can be on the back. But whatever the case might be, they're adding it. It's in the OS to have that fingerprint support. This one is pretty cool. Is that something Android has, which I know that now even iOS refers to widgets, but really they're kind of like widgets that exist in the notification pull-down curtain. But so if I wanted to add a widget previously on devices, when you'd go to widgets, it was horizontal scrolling, and they all just were like alphabetical. And so maybe you just installed an app, and you could tell, because maybe if the app was Evernote, then you'd see, and you suddenly come to the E's, and there's like, the Evernote various, there might be 3 or 4 widgets that you could have. But otherwise, sometimes it's kind of hard to see them. So what they've done now is when you actually choose on widgets, they've grouped them together, so you can see that there's one calendar widget. And my focus, get further away. So there's a calendar widget, 2 Chrome widgets, 2 clock widgets. Looks like there's 3 drive widgets. So you see how they're grouping them together by the app, and so just a nice little touch to where when someone would go to add widgets, that they would just make a lot more sense. That you can see that there's like 4 news and weather type widgets that you could choose from. So if I chose just this one, that's you press and hold it and decide where you're going to set the widget, and then boom, you've got it added to your screen. So that's just a nice touch.
And do you have a 6?
Yep.
You do? Besides your finger, you can do your toe. We had somebody at the meeting.
Oh, yes.
Did that.
That they actually they registered their toe for Touch ID.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And it works?
It's a fail safe. What happens if you get both hands burnt?
Well, you've always got the passcode.
Yeah, you can put a passcode. You know what? I put a passcode in. I don't need it. I've got like 3 fingers. No problem. 2 hands, 3 fingers. I have no problem. You reboot it. You have to put the passcode in. It won't reach finger before you do the passcode. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, what did I use for the passcode? And I knew what I used. I knew what I used, but I didn't remember the capitals, where I put capital letters in it, and I didn't write it down.
Yeah.
I have them all written down for that very reason.
Yeah. Why?
But yeah, she used her toe. She was on her phone painting her toenails. And said, I wonder if my toe will work. Sure enough, it worked.
Yeah.
Is this your wife?
No.
No. Just loaded another game.
No.
So some of the other things with Android M are kind of under the hood, and one of them is called Doze, which there's nothing really to be able to see on it. But what Doze does is that it will let the device in all the apps doze off or sleep when not in use, potentially doubling battery life. And this is essentially something iOS has had for a while, so that an iOS device could just sit if you aren't using it, and it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and you sit down with your iPad and you come back at 8 o'clock at night, it's still going to have the majority of the battery left, because it did this basically equivalent of Doze. So Android M will end up having Doze, to where it goes into deep sleep with an app if it's detected. And I think it's largely from if the device is just sitting still and the accelerometer knows that it's level and just sitting, and so that it's parked. It's like, all right, I'm going to put everything. So then it might take a moment longer for the device to actually wake up. You know, it's not that much longer, but just it's not going to be instantaneous because the apps aren't just like they're hovering in the background, and that's something Android up to now has been a battery killer to where you could set a device down if it was a tablet or a phone, and hours later come back, you're like, I haven't even used it, and yet
there's 30% battery life.
Yeah, they have the battery life left. So that's supposed to be a huge thing. I even said Apple's had something similar for years.
What happened if you turn internet and every connections off?
Well, you could do that, but then you don't have to do that in this case. You wouldn't have to worry about that.
But if you did that?
If you did, it would certainly, yeah. Because I think that it's just a lot of things, and I myself included, I probably have I think about 110 apps on my phone. And so, gosh knows which ones I've got set. Now, granted, certain ones, right from the start, I've set them so that they aren't going to go out and fetch for news until I ask them or whatnot. But there are so many that even if it's just occasionally, you've got this one is going out and checking for updates, and this one's doing this. That's what's suddenly sucking down some battery. And so Doze is supposed to quiet them down. And as I understand, I don't know if it says here, it'll recognize when a device is not used, puts apps in a low power state, lower than before, and stops apps or device wakes, notifications from coming through. It won't stop important notifications like Gmail alerts, Facebook messages, and texts coming through. And users can even manage what apps can doze, so that you could choose when you set the doze feature and say, these certain ones, without a doubt, I want to get notified for, but otherwise it's supposed to extend battery life, which would be cool because at this point, like we were talking about earlier, there's so much parity on these devices, but we're all still desiring to end up having battery life that would last even longer. I mean, the Apple Watch hasn't had a problem lasting all day long on a battery charge, but there are still people saying, well, then why can't it be like the Pebble, where you charge it and use it for days and days? So battery life is still something that eludes us on all these devices, where if we can find more ways to be more efficient with it, hallelujah.
They're going to have to.
Yeah.
Right, because they're going to put a Wi-Fi chip in it.
Yeah, I mean, and there's rumored, I can't remember his name, the guy who's from Mac Rumors, but that he said that they're going to be putting a front-facing camera onto the Apple Watch and end up having FaceTime. You know, the true Dick Tracy watch will be coming, and then you end up figuring at some point in time when they'll miniaturize it enough, because I used to have a watch, like this time last year I had the O-Mate True Smart watch, and it had a phone. It had a micro SIM that you put in it, and it was a phone. So you literally could make phone calls and have a data plan and the whole 9 yards. I had a little T-Mobile plan that I paid to play with it, and yet it was one honking watch on your wrist. Right. I mean, that thing was enormous. But they get that miniaturized down. In a couple of years, we definitely will have watches that will be a phone that's going to be on your wrist, and you can go out the door and end up having most of your functionality. Your watch is pretty good size. They're going to get to where it'll be
no bigger than that,
and have all that functionality. So
Skype right on your wrist.
Don't you think eventually, though, the battery technology will catch up with all this? Just like once upon a time we had to compress our hard disk to get everything on there, and then they just came up with better hard disk technology where almost nobody, needs hard disk space.
It almost reminds me, though, of all these years with carburetors and whatnot, and these stories that we've heard of the auto manufacturers just, all of a sudden, Juliana invents a carburetor that gets 200 miles to the gallon, and all of a sudden, whatever happened to Juliana? Whatever happened to that carburetor she's working on? Because they just kind of squished you and said, no way, because we need to be able to sell gas. And, so that's not going to, so then likewise, there could be people out there that are, have some sort of revolutionary way with battery that would just be like, hey, like with watches, it'd be like, what if it just was powered and somehow it regenerated the battery from just the sweat on your wrist, and it was some sort of electromagnetically that you were recharging it, and they'd be like, no. We need to be able to sell these devices. We need for batteries to die so we can sell more of them, etc. I think of every time that I'm having to buy more, because 9-volt batteries have gotten so expensive, and every time that, not every gig, but every couple gigs, I end up going to the store and having to buy another pack of 9-volt batteries, and they're like, $15, $20. I'm like, and it's just, I wish that batteries were just
for your home for.
No, for my guitar.
Yes.
And for there are certain pedals that I can just plug in, but there are other devices that I just have to have a 9-volt battery in it, and they're flipping expensive. And even these ones that are like the Mega Super Max Duracell, and it still doesn't last that long. It still dies. Lastly, and you don't really see it on, and this one's not connected on the internet anyway, so I'll show on here, is Google Now on tap, and then we're going to talk about some of the iOS-related things that are very similar, and some of the things that they're going to be doing, is that what you'll be able to do with Google Now on Tap is you'll be able to long press on the, let me get my finger over here, on my little circle there, on the home button, and whatever app you're in, that Google basically is then seeing the information that's on the screen, and you could do a search from that. You could also actually even just conjure up Google while you're in the app, and then say, you know, who is this person or whatever. I'm going to show you the info. I'll give you an example, though, that right now it's not in Android M yet, because it's really, I think it's more from a service side of things, and so then they just haven't turned that on. But here's an example. This just happens to be a page that I pulled up about Google Play Music. And now, if I press and hold, the Google search is going to come up. Well, it's going to make a liar of me. It did. It made a liar out of me. I thought that. Let me try another page. Let me. It should do it because it's. No, that didn't do it. It's failing on me. I should be able to search. Let me open up another page rather than that APK mirror. Maybe that's why. If I just go to. All right, so I'm just going to bring up Diddy arrested after a fight with UCLA football coach. That looks interesting. Okay, so this is supposed to be the same thing as Google Now on Tap, but it's in the Chrome browser, if I can get it to work right. All right, so there's the article about Diddy. And sorry for that not being focused well. All right, now I should be able to press and hold on the home key. And it's not working for me.
Looks like it's starting to come up. But
No, but it's just failing. So what it should do right then is that it would search, it would bring up it brings up like on half the screen, which actually is using kind of like that split screen stuff, which is supposed to be another thing that's going to come in Android M. It's not showing now, but it's going to be that capability of multi-window mode. So you can end up having the lower portion be a window and the other portion be a window, which is something iOS is bringing as well. So you end up having that split screen kind of thing, and then they're going to ultimately end up having a larger iPad and try to make it, you know, partnering with IBM. It's going to be a massive work device because you're going to end up having that multi-window capability, etc. So anyway, that's what Now on Tap.
I don't know if it's the same, but when I select like a word.
That's what it is. I'm missing a part.
Yeah, you have to.
Diddy, there we go.
Yeah.
Now see Diddy on fire. Thank you. Thank you for guiding me through there. I mean, see, now there's the window. So that now what it's doing is it's doing the search for Diddy. And then you end up having all the info. So there it is. Thank you. And so that you have to select the word on the page.
That's pretty slick.
So likewise, what is supposed to be the Now on Tap, which is really just expounding upon Google Now, I'm still waiting for an update to my device. I'm running Android 5.0, and Android 5.1 is supposed to fix memory issues, and you can see from the screen lag, my device is just dragging. I check it daily to see if it's...
Is this the G4? Or?
Moto X. Yep, and so that they just haven't pushed. It's supposed to be coming. Everyone keeps saying, why don't you have it yet? I'm like, I don't know. It's not on my device, so I'm suffering with memory lag. Basically what Now on Tap will end up doing is you could just be in an app, and like in that case, it could have just been where it was that article on Diddy, and that you could just say, okay, Google, more info on him, and not even say his name, and because it's now looking at that page and just sees that info and knows what you're looking for, or you're in a particular app. Now, what it will require for certain apps is that for those apps to allow the permission for Google to index them, which is the same thing Apple's going to be asking of apps as well. And so when it comes thinking in the context of Humana, I'm curious of like what our privacy office and compliance is going to be thinking about the fact we've got HIPAA regulated apps, so then it's not likely they're going to share that info. But it could be, as long as, and I'm just speculating, it could be like, say, in the My Humana app where you can search for doctors and whatnot. that if that's information that's not sensitive, instead it's just a list of information, maybe we'd allow that to be indexed, because then that's just simply providers, their address, their phone number, if it happens to be the pharmacy. Because then if there's something that from indexing the app for iOS or for Android that would help, so that when you go to search or you're looking for something, you're interacting with the app, that'd be helpful. And then if there's any of the other views in the app that it's really private information, like, no, you can't index that. That stuff is, you can't do that. But we'll have to see. I think it's going to be more like generic apps that are not so sensitive as ours that will succeed in being indexed for much more powerful things, being able to have something like now on tap capability. So that pretty much is like summarizes what's taking place with Android M. Something else I just want to show right now is just like the in Google Photos is, and this is for Android or iOS. So it's something I think is very cool. That first off, that you can have unlimited storage of photos now in Google Photos. And when I hear, it's a shame, I see being on Facebook or just friends talking and just say how they've lost some photos, or they're just transferring their photos over from their old phone, and even if it's not Google Photos, it's like Dropbox or iCloud, whatever your choice is. Back these things up. Don't just have them sitting on a device to where you potentially your device falls in the water or gets crushed or you lost it or whatever, and also you've lost all those memories. I just love Google Photos and love the fact that it is device agnostic to where it doesn't matter what your device you're using. If you want to elect, well, I won't say Windows Phone, but nonetheless that at least Android, iOS, that you can choose to have them all backed up, and it's unlimited. They're just at a reduced file size, not so bad that it really affects the quality of them, but otherwise it will count against your Google Drive storage if you want to have them be the full-blown, and that's up to I think 16 megapixel pictures. And then the part that's really some of the things that I like, you can also end up having where there will be, it might make stories and animations out of some of your photos. And
you can create stories now?
Yes. Yeah. So
Yeah.
So you can create stories. Well, I'm not sure if, yeah, you can create a story. It used to be the stories were only just, generated. You could create, if you had like a Nexus device, you could create an auto awesome movie. But on other devices, you couldn't necessarily create. Instead, it was just like, I'm not seeing as many auto awesome movies being made. I did today, though. When we were at the Pride Parade, and a lot of pictures, a lot of video, and then it did put together an auto awesome movie. But usually I end up nowadays, I'll just make them because I just want to put them in this particular order and trim them my own way anyway. But it's nice just to be that capability of just adding some pizzazz, as well as like make a collage or an animation. But if you go over to the menu, you can see that like the assistant shows that where it might have done, say it made the movie from the parade, and there my wife was twirling her baton at the parade. So then they call it an assistant, but then that's basically where you just get a notification saying, hey, there was another movie from the parade, there's one from a party we went to last Sunday, and it just created the movie from the photos and videos I took. But what I think is really cool is if I end up just going to the photos, and I know that on iOS there's something similar to this where I can pinch like this and start to change. I've gone from individual photos to where you see I'm squeezing it out now. I'm just got them by the months and can view that way. Otherwise, then I can zoom on in at a different level. And now I'm like looking at May, or now I'm down to the day level. But what's really cool is to just be able to search. And when I hit search, first it does people. So it's showing some of the people that I've had. The light's kind of messing with it. But I see me, my wife, my mother-in-law, Andrew Clayton from work, Nicole from work, and my sister. And then otherwise it's got places.
Eating what?
He's eating a bacon donut. And then it's got it by places, and it also got things, and then you can search by types. So then I'm trying to think of something I might want to, I'll just search. I don't have that many pictures of, I'll just say, where's my voice search? Oops. Football. Well, I'll type it then. And this isn't your football, this is our football. And it's going to now search all of my, I think I got about 25,000 photos uploaded currently. I'm still working on, I've got many, many more sitting on a 500 gig hard drive where from your desktop you can also just set to upload those automatically to Google as well. And then over time it will index them all. And so now this is finding pictures that have to do with football, which is kind of interesting. This doesn't seem as successful as I would have thought because none of these yet look like anything that have to do with football. Oh, there we go. So there's some shots from the Notre Dame football game that I went to with my brother in the fall. But if I did try something a little bit more generic, if I just said, cats, then I'm going to obviously get lots of pictures of all of my cats. But the capability of it, you can even be searching for people. And no, let me try that. Let me try Andrew Clayton.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yes.
this last year, I mean, lunch. That's me.
Yeah. Sorry again for my bad focus, but.
Yagi is the one on the right. That's funny.
So I thought I had more pictures. That's from Friday, May 30th, 2014.
Yeah.
But Google Photos just really rocks. And I know that some people are kind of creeped out by having so much information like that. But it kind of reminds me, I saw glimpses of this, the machine learning back with, it's called Google Goggles. And it's a separate app that you can get to where it would basically search by pictures. So you could take a picture of something and it would do a Google search looking for things with that picture. Well then, what you also could end up getting is if you turned goggles on, that when you took pictures, that Google Goggles would be like looking at your pictures and then bring up things and say, are you interested in this or whatever? And I was with my brother and he was standing by a house I was taking a picture of, and there was like a Honda Accord or something sitting right on the street in front of him, and when all of a sudden Goggles came up and said Honda Accord, and it had like zoomed in and had a circle around the hubcap of the car and saw the Honda logo, and I was like, oh my gosh, and it was a Honda Accord, but I mean it identified, and that was probably like 2-3 years ago. So you can see that it's just, and actually just today I heard a news bit about that Facebook now can detect you in a photo without seeing your face. So you could,
Really?
without looking straight on, so that it's they're 85% accuracy of identifying you by clothing that you normally wear, the way you normally stand, or slouch, whatever the case might be, getting a profile shot, even just like that you might be walking down the street and you'd be like, hey, there's Sue. Because, from a distance, you'd be like, I recognize her from her hair, or just the way she's walking, the way her arms always flail, and then suddenly, then there they are, and there's a shot, and you'd be like, oh, is this you? And it'd be like, yeah, because there's her arms out to her sides, So pretty creepy to think that Facebook's already got that capability being introduced. So, it's here, and you have to just embrace it because the machines are getting very smart. So we'll move on, just since I want to make sure that we kind of make some comparisons where we can. And do any of you guys played with the developer preview yet of the next version of iOS?
Not yet.
So I know, and this first I'll just start with it's not really a rant, but my theory. And I even had an article that I've saved in Pocket. And in a sentence, Apple is slowly divorcing themselves from all things Google. They are on a path, and what I really feel, and this is the world according to Matt, is that several years back when Steve Jobs sat and had coffee with Eric Schmidt, and there were pictures of them sitting in Silicon Valley at some coffee shop, and people were like, wow, what are they talking about? And then later Eric Schmidt admitted at that time that that was when Steve said he was upset about how he's like, you stole, Android is theft, you stole this from me, and so on and so forth. He was going off about the fact that how everything that was the iPhone, that Google went and stole it because Eric Schmidt sat on the board, and so that, no sooner had an iPhone come out that Google went back to the drawing board from the first phone they made, and they came out with Android. And it looked,
on Apple's board.
And yeah, he was. And so then that they definitely, if nothing else, there's just always that plagiarism of each other, what continues to this day. But at that time, Steve was so mad, he said, I will spend my every last cent to annihilate you. I will go global thermonuclear on you all. So he was just like, I will destroy Android. And he was hell-bent on that at that time. A couple of years later, he's really falling ill and then died. So then people were wondering, okay, what's going to happen with that? And my theory is that I think that at that point, then Tim Cook said, we're going to continue this global thermonuclear war, but we're going to do it in a way that's so subtle, and that is we are going to divorce ourselves from all things Google. And everything that we've ever depended on Google for, from maps to search to any other kind of thing, we'll make the equivalent of. We're going to make it better, and we'll make it so that we don't even need, so that our average user will end up picking up an iPhone. And unless they're a power user who's going to go out to the store and say, oh, I want to have Gmail, oh, I want to have Google Drive, I want to have Google Maps or whatever, there'll still be those people who will do that, but the vast majority, like my wife is a good example of just someone who's just that basic user who's going to pick up the phone and going to use on it what's on it. And so then there's going to be Apple Maps, and now all of a sudden they will have the equivalent of Google Now, to where now it's not going to be in the same level of capacity. Even Danny Sullivan, who works for Search Engine Land, talked about that, like what Apple's about to release with iOS 9 and them having Spotlight and Siri kind of merging together becomes like what Google Now is. But he said that's Google in 2008, and now Google's Google in 2015, and how advanced it is. But that's okay to the average user. They aren't going to know what they're missing. They're going to know that their Apple Calendar and their Apple Maps and all that stuff's going to tie together just like what Google's been doing. But they'll slowly, right now, the Spotlight pulls up Bing. It does not bring up Google, so that I think that ultimately they're just getting to the point, and part of it I'm okay with, that it's just like, that's fine, and a person's just going to make a choice of what they want. Then there's others, I just think, wow, I think it's awesome how at least Google tries to make an effort to where it doesn't matter what platform you're on, Google just wants the data so that they can continue to sell ads, so on and so forth, and just amass the world's information, which is really supposed to be their objective, is just amassing all the information to make it easy to access, etc. And when you suddenly just have this chasm to where you're going to end up having millions of users on iOS who will be divorced from Google, it's really going to, it's not like the haves and have-nots, but you'll just end up having two camps that, like, there's not going to be like cross-pollination between them, except like at that power user level to where someone's going to be like,
you think third parties will make up for that?
They might, but and they know that all this just kind of works out because that Google's got to be thinking about this. Google's they try whenever possible. I mean, every time they announce something, even say like with Photos, that as soon as they announced the new Photos app and they kind of broke it out from Google Plus and made it its own standalone thing and said, now storage is free, store as many as you want, then there are still some people, and even people I personally talk to, they're like, no, I'm not interested in having anything stored on Google. I don't want Google to know my business. And I'll tell them how wonderful it is to have Google Now pop something up on my watch or on my phone or on my glass and tell me it's time for you to leave for such and such thing, because then it knows all that. Ultimately,
borderline creepy.
But ultimately, Apple's going to be doing that. But at the same time, it's questionable how well Apple will be able to do it when they profess that they don't know about your data, they don't care about your data. And that right now their spiel is they're really trying to paint Google in a bad light of like, Google has all your info, we don't want your information, we don't have your information, but if you have a Mac, an iPad, and an iPhone, and an Apple Watch, and you are surfing on your tablet, and you now have search history and your visiting history of where you've been, and you suddenly pick up your phone, without them being able to have a device ID tied and know this is your info, I'm curious just to see how this is still going to play out, for them to say that they can have information shared between the devices when they say none of your information that's on your device is tied to your device ID. And how they still, so it's like they're talking about both sides of their mouth as far as how they're really going to make that work, and we'll see. But if they do it successfully, the less they're going to use Google, that's just my theory according to Matt, is how they just continue that global thermonuclear war against Google, to where it's like, it doesn't have to be a bunch of fire and brimstone. Instead, it's just like, we're going to slowly, subtly wean ourselves totally away if anything has to do with you. And then they said, I was listening to a podcast talking about it. They said, I don't see Apple ever getting to the point of forbidding people to have Google Apps be on their device. They wouldn't go that far.
Well, Steve Jobs hated Intel until he didn't. That's all I have to say.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that I wish that there could still just be, there will be the option, but instead of just so forcibly trying to really break off, because the more that there is interoperability between them, then it's better for all of us. Just so that,
I was just thinking about this the other day. What about the millions and millions and millions of Android users who can't use iTunes on their Android device?
Well, that's changing. I mean, there's going to be, that Apple Music will be available on Android.
Oh, will it really?
Yes. It's not going to have the free trial period like on iOS, and I think it's supposed to just come in the fall. So probably about the time that they actually release it to be on iOS 9 and on the devices there, they'll time it so they'll make it available. So, and that's a smart move from Apple's part, because if they truly want to be the premier music service, then that's a good gesture to see that right at announcing it, that it's like, and there's going to be an Android version, because then people are like, wow, you're kidding me. Not right away, so that typical, wait a little bit, but I think that's a good sign as far as for there to continue to be interoperability, because there's a lot of Android users who do use iTunes. I've never used iTunes. I've always had different methods, and so like I use Google Play Music.
I do too.
But as a matter of fact, speaking of Google Play Music, they just announced today, and I just put the app onto my phone, but I've got the paid version, so I pay like $7.99 a month for unlimited music, is that if you don't have that, you can now get the unlimited music on Google Play Music, but you end up having it ad supported. So then a person in iOS or Android and on the web, so that if you go to Google Play Music, now you basically get, you can store 50,000 songs, and then you get unlimited streaming music from anything on there, and it's ad supported. So
we've now discovered how to make Apple do things, unleash Taylor Swift on them.
That's weird.
That was it really, and it's all speculation, and people can speculate all they want, but I did post about it on Facebook to some of my friends just to rib them, because I'm not a hater, but I do like that. Is that I said it's just awful funny that they spent quite a long time negotiating with the labels about the fact of like, okay, this is what we're going to do, but we're going to have the 90-day period to where it's during the trial period, we're not going to pay any royalties, and all the labels agree to it. And on Sunday, Taylor Swift makes a post on Tumblr, and on Monday, Apple reverses the decision, something that took months to negotiate, and then they just, that was about as staged as could be as far as to make them seem like that they were like, it's like the saviors, that now we're going to take you, oh, you know what, good idea, Taylor, yes, we'll do it, and then in the blink of an eye. Still, I think it's great, because being a musician and knowing that, especially in that first 90 days, is a critical time to where, for someone to have, where there's going to be that visitation to check out your new music. And as 3 months goes on down the line, there's more new music. And those artists who have just tried to put out some stuff, they might have been dabbled with and not got paid a thing. And then all of a sudden, after that 90 days, just the attrition and just the amount of people that would end up visiting their music and then them getting paid would have been horrible. So it's just nice to know, especially with $160 billion in the bank. I think Apple can afford to be able to pay that out. So it's a good thing all around. So
you think that was on purpose or what? Like, it's weird.
I don't know. It's just kind of.
Maybe it was just a different way to announce that.
Well, what you're saying kind of reminds me of a programming teacher I had when I was going for my computer science degree. You said, you introduce a loop in your programs that slows it down. So as you introduce new features, the new features won't slow it down. You just take that out of the specially timed loop that originally slowed the program down.
That reminds me of something. We're kind of bouncing around a little bit, but that's okay. Is the SDK that's going to be coming out to allow for native apps to run on the Apple Watch. And I was listening to a couple different podcasts, and I do try to stay well-rounded with the podcasts I listen to. So one was called Connected, and it's 3 guys, and it's all iOS. And it's an English guy, an American guy, and an Italian guy, who are all, the Italian guy, his name is Federici, and he writes like for Macworld, I think.
Federici.
I think his last name is Federici. But anyway, that they're very knowledgeable, and so then I learn a lot from listening to them, and so they're very candid to where if there's an issue that they've got with iOS, like when iOS 8 first came out, and they had some different things that were just very enlightening to hear them talk through them, because they are haters. They love Apple and iOS and et cetera. So then for them to be critical about a thing allowed me to like, okay, they're talking, they've got some weight behind what they're talking about, because this is something that bothers them, and it's not just someone writing some clickbait article to just want to slam because they're an Apple hater. Instead, this is a person who's an Apple aficionado and saying, you know what, they could improve on this thing. And they were just talking about the fact that, was it a good idea or not did they release the watch too fast when they made it so that it had to be the apps were only on the phone and not really running natively on the watch, and that so soon after it just being released, they've already announced, and now here comes the apps to be able to run on the watch. Granted, it didn't take Humana long to make Q, that app. It was like 6 weeks of development, but still all that effort right there. Now to make it a native app means at the very least another 6 weeks of development and all that money to now make it so it would run natively on the watch, which would make it run faster. You could add some more functionality to it, etc. But it's just that I think that it was supposed to be a stopgap, that it was like, we need to get the watch on out and get some interest. And it was supposed to be like September before they were even going to make it available. Now it's going to be in developers' hands much sooner. So this made me think of that when you were just talking about the loop kind of thing, because I don't think it was intended, but it was their way of like, how can we get the watch out faster? It's like, well, make it so it's just the apps are extending from the phone on out to the watch, and then make the native watch development. So the whole watch category is still so much in its infancy. It was interesting just to see as people are using the watch, listening to a couple of people who've had them, and even a couple of podcast people like Tom Merritt said that he had it and he wore it for a month, and then for the past month he's had his producer of his show wearing it, and he's like, I haven't even missed it. I didn't realize that it wasn't really doing all that much for me. I could do without my watch and I'd be fine because I've got glass. And if you were asking me of the two, which I'd rather have, I'd definitely rather have glass than the watch. I didn't wear a watch since probably like 2000 when I got one of my first PDAs. That was my watch. It was with me all the time. I didn't have to wear a watch anymore. It was like, hallelujah. And then as soon as this came on out, well, I had to get it. But boy, it was weird suddenly having something on my wrist again. And if I didn't have glass, I would appreciate it because it is nice. And I'm sure, Javier, you're getting used to the fact of just, you feel your phone buzz, but you don't have to reach for it in your pocket.
Yeah.
But then, as like the other day, you were carrying stuff in both hands, and it's like, now what would happen though if you got a notification and your hands are full, and you're like, phone's in pocket, wrist is occupied, I can't even see it, and that's where I love about glass. I'd look up and see that notification. There's still a lot to come with these as far as to figure out what things are going to be the most important. I look forward to, I already use, like when I go to Qdoba, I have the QR code will just pop up. So then once I'm right there at Qdoba, just like the Google Wallet says, you want to use your QR code, and then I've got it there. I wish I could also just complete the payment, So I'm envious of how that Apple Pay working on the watch where it can. We're still very, very much in our infancy. You guys have chip and PIN already in your countries, right? Don't you, as far as with the credit cards?
In Argentina, I don't think, I think you can have it, but it's not like...
Because we're only just now, we're getting it in October. So I just got a new debit card issued to me just the other day.
Right, no, I think
and it's got the PIN, and it's got the chip in it.
I'm slowly getting that.
But I know that Europe is way far ahead.
Yeah, mandatory.
And so then
17 in this country.
I've had trouble traveling with my normal credit card that took the chip. Yeah.
And so, that's something I definitely see as a benefit with the watch, is that to be able to have, you're at a place, Starbucks or whatever place, and you've got the member card, and you're like, to just scan, now all of a sudden that part's registered, is like now pay, and then you didn't have to reach for anything. So that's where I like how they just keep, each OS keeps pushing one another. And then Pebble, I'm glad Pebble's still doing strong. It's not, there are people that will just say, I'd much rather have that because you just charge it, let it go for days, and what it does, it's a little more simple, rather than trying to be everything. Certainly Apple has thrown everything with the kitchen sink at this watch for the first time around. There's a lot of stuff on there, and I wonder how much when they're like looking at their metrics, how much certain things, if they're like looking, wow, users aren't even using this thing or this thing. But similarly, with either device, there have been things have been introduced. I know, like on iOS, Passbook. Up to now, Passbook is, I won't say a flop, but it has not taken off. When it first came out, people were just thinking, oh, I'm going to have like the tickets to the baseball game will be in there, and I'll have the tickets to the movies, and I'll have my airplane tickets will be in there, and it's just.
The other day for the first time for a concert, but it was the first time.
And how did it work? Did it work well?
Yeah, it worked well.
You know, as a matter of fact, I went to an event, was it last week already? Yeah, to see Robert Scoble talk, and he came into town, and it was one of those Eventbrite events. So then I had the Eventbrite app on my phone.
I do those all the time.
And I'm always disappointed every time I go to an event where they use Eventbrite, and there's a QR code that comes up that is like your ticket. And I keep expecting to go to an event, and someone will be sitting there and be able to scan you in and register, and yet no one, even if it's just with
checking you off on the list.
Right, they had a piece of paper. So then this time, there I was, and thinking, oh, I can't wait. And so then I already had the QR code was on my watch. I come up to the counter, and I see the girls already, because I'm a couple people back, and see they just have their little piece of paper. They're like, and your name, and their names. So I walk up, they go, your name, and I go, and I hold my QR code in front of me. Oh, wow, and they're all like admiring it. And they're like, we can't do anything with that. I was like, yeah, I know. But this is like one of these days. So
That
it's just
speaks absolute volumes about Louisville and its entrepreneurial community. I mean, that speaks volumes that nobody does that here.
Well,
I bet you go elsewhere and people aren't doing it either. I mean, it's available that's not being used.
well, let's chat of this. We've all worked with computers for years, right?
Mhm.
How many times have you been sitting in your office and something that you could do manually in 5 minutes, you decide you're going to figure out how to do it using your computer.
Right.
2 days later, you finally figure out the solution.
Yeah.
So, you know, really, it's still very simple to
Yeah.
check people's name off,
Yeah.
print out the list, and check people's names off.
You know, that's, even when you have paper tickets and go to NFL, NBA games, whatever, they scan those.
That's true.
I mean, you know, and it speaks volumes that we
Or
are
your airline ticket.
yeah, we're not tech oriented about that kind of stuff.
Well, you know, and I wonder, as far as I've not personally done it, but say with that Eventbrite, would it be that if you're the host of the event, that would it bring up a QR reader in the app that you then, you know, if someone did come on up, that you suddenly, I'm not picturing like that they have to have a special handheld scanner, but I mean that it would be like,
But a computer, I mean, with a phone, you should be able to do it.
you know, if you are the host, I have to check that out and just see, because I haven't hosted an event, but you know, it would be so nice. And as of yet, the only thing I've really, in all honesty, that I've used my watch with a QR code most frequently has been at Qdoba. And that's because I've tried it at some other places. The scanners at Kroger will not scan my Kroger barcode.
Subway might if the employee knows that.
Yeah, I haven't tried it at Subway, but some of them, just their scanners are not those newer ones to where they really can even scan a phone screen well.
Right.
But Qdoba just has, I noticed the ones that they've got are just a newer model, and so it's just not adopted yet. Not to say the QR codes are all that, but even if it's just a member barcode, because I have all of my member cards are in Google Wallet. And you know, and it pulls it up, and it is in a barcode fashion. It's got the number right below, so if the person couldn't scan it, they can at least key it. Because I don't carry all those member cards in my wallet anymore. I don't have for the gas station and for this and for that. I always just use my phone number at Kroger. Just put that in, you know, so that I don't have to worry about carrying yet another card. Since it won't scan the phone, then I'm like, all right, fine, I'll just hand key it. But
You'd be surprised, you know, like Staples, I'm very big a Staples rewards guy, and they cannot scan the barcode on your phone. Again, I was someplace else that was, I can't remember where it was, but it wasn't very technology oriented, and they were able to read my email with barcode.
well, it's just like
Is that a barcode or is that a QR code? It's
QR.
you're saying,
Yeah.
I was just trying to think. QR code. That's what it is. That is a very goofy QR, because usually QR is square, and yet they've done a bar with QR blocky.
yeah.
As a matter of fact, even like with the My Humana app, speaking of like poor technology, is the majority of, unless someone's like a younger provider, towards like a young doctor who's just, you know, now technologically hip and wants to spend that money on his office, her office, and have the capability for new stuff, then instead, when you come on in, they're going to want to take a photocopy of your ID card, put that on the copying machine, and have that piece of paper to put into that paper file and stick into those rolling things that they got 10,000 other files in. And we suddenly have now the front and back image of the ID card. And it's the real picture. I mean, it's the JPEG image of your card. And if a person didn't have their real card with them and they just had the app and go, but here's my card, and be like, well, we need to take a copy of it. They're going to lay that down on a flatbed scanner, and they're going to have a silhouette of a phone is what they're going to have. They're not going to take. So we added, so they just send as a fax. And some people looked and said, you've got to be kidding me. Send to fax from this app? And it's like, think about it. Many providers would be like, I need to have a copy of that. So then you send it, and now it's going to be a faxed image of it, and now it arrives at their copying machine on a piece of paper. They're happy camper. But it's like, you had to build in that capability to be backward compatible to.
Well, there is something to that, though. Just think about, the different, in our lifetimes, we have been working with tech. I remember, I actually didn't use them, but I worked with a machine that used them, 8-inch floppies. Who can read 8-inch floppies now? So if that data wasn't transferred to another media, it's basically lost unless someone goes out and buys.
As a matter of fact, I was thinking about that the other day, that I need to get a floppy drive that can hook into USB, because I happened upon a box of some floppies that are in my office at home.
But then when you put them in, they may or may not work, because floppies had a horrible, shelf life.
Right. Yeah. So it could be wasted. But I'm just curious of what, I don't know if there might be pictures around there. I can't think of much.
I have a 5 1/4-inch drive at home, brand new in the box, and shells of 5 1/4-inch floppies.
I remember for a while I was using those, I think it was iOmega, and they were the...
Oh yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, I have one of those too.
What were they called? Like zip
drives.
It was zip, and I think it might have been 100 megabytes.
Well,
They're
there
moving
was
boxes
250,
originally.
there were 250 and 750.
Were they that big? But I remember it was looked like a floppy.
Well, they were.
And so I've got a small box of those, and I'm like, I have no idea what's happening. You're not even recognizing.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
It was a previous size of large digital media that were, larger than floppies, but, not as big as what we have now. And they had a specialized reader, that looked something like a tape drive. They were about that thick.
Yeah.
I never think so.
And the company was iOmega, which I guess still exists.
Businesses.
Doing something.
It makes you wonder. It's like at some point in time, I mean, I would hope that 50 years from now, if people have a bunch of CDs and DVDs sitting around, that
Did you ever see
someone would be like,
did you ever see the movie The Time Machine from the late 50s, early 60s, starring Rod Taylor as it was the H.G. Wells novel translated into a movie. It goes 10,000 years in the future, and at some point he finds these discs that look kind of like CDs, and they play by rolling them around in a little thing that looked like a tub washing machine.
Yeah.
and they would talk about the wars that happened in the past.
I know my dad had some tapes that were like those reel-to-reel tapes, they're just big, and so then he had sent them to me because they were cleaning out their house, and he's like, here, if you want to get these. And it turned out that it was my grandmother, I think on my mother's side, where she was reciting some poems.
Wow.
And stuff that was me. I was probably about 3 or 4 years old, and I was babbling, and my dad was recording it. And I ended up, what I ended up doing was going to a place and renting an old reel-to-reel thing, and then it had a jack out, and took that, plugged it into the computer, and then I still had to kind of play with the sound to get them all to work right. But I was so glad I was able to actually find a machine that I could play that old format onto, and then put them all onto MP3 and send them off to the family. And my mom was just crying. She couldn't believe when she was hearing her mom reading those poems. She's like, oh, she used to read those to me as a kid. And my dad had just had those sitting in a box forever. And wow. But what if there hadn't been a machine and just be like, here sits this tape, and you'd be pulling it off this reel, going, how do you listen to this?
What do you do with that?
Before magnetic tape recordings, there were wax cylinders. Machines that recorded on wax cylinder and then played them back.
I remember there was a guy who actually brought some of those onto a show that was that Leo Laporte. It might have been on when Tech TV was still on television, And so he brought in like 2 wax cylinders that were very rare, and he dropped one of them on the show. And it shattered on the floor. Yeah. But you can imagine, because that guy is probably just there, like, they might not have even been his, and he was just there to, like, demonstrate them. And then you drop them, and you're like,
2 points. Back to they're making paper copies and putting them in a file.
Yeah.
DEA. Okay, that's why. DEA requires paper file, so they can come in and get it when they want it. They have somebody that you're treating, and not so much the person who's gotten all the drugs. That's when they want to come look at the doctor who's doing.
But ultimately, we're going to go paperless, so the DEA is just going to have to.
You're going to have to learn, yes.
Yeah.
The other thing is, there's a startup business for somebody. Nobody's going to get billionaire rich for it, but it's a good business if somebody wanted to do it. If you would set up a set of machines and have 8-inch, 5 1/4, 3.5-inch floppies, because law firms have rooms full of 8-inch floppy drives, disk, and 5 1/4s.
Wang was the big, word processors.
Yeah.
Everybody in the 80s, that's what they used.
Yes.
So, that's how.
Well, they're even readable at this point.
They should be. Most of them will be. Obviously, they're not going to be perfect, but that's a startup business for somebody. Nobody's going to become a millionaire off of it.
Well,
but it's a good job, and you get some law firms, they may be fighting a case that goes back 40 years, 38, 39 years, 38 years when those things were used, and there may be a room full of them, and they need to do something with them. Magnetic tapes for computers are still used, so